The 2014 governor's map looks like this. Both sides picking up at least one state in this red wave environment. We already did a flashback for the Senate night here. Let's see what happened for governor. Overall, out of 36 states that had an election for governor, Republicans ended up with 31, the Dems finished with 18, and independents had a pickup. We'll start in Alabama. Not much to say here. Robert Bentley won another term here for the Republicans. However, he did go on to resign a little bit later on. He got just under two-thirds of the vote. Now in Alaska, this one was more exciting. Incumbent Republican Sean Parnell was actually defeated, but it was not by a Democrat. It was by independent Bill Walker. There wasn't even a Democrat on the ballot, so that had to help him. Walker used to be a Republican, and he won with a plurality 48.1%. But Parnell was unpopular, so an incumbent governor going down, that's notable. Let's go to Arizona. Here it's Doug Ducey. He won his first term. He didn't sweat it out at all. He got 53.4%. That's almost 12%. Then in Arkansas, back then they were still kind of coming out of the era of the conservative blue dog type of Democrat. But now that flipped. Asa Hutchinson actually had success this time in his run for governor. He's over 55%. Mike Ross doesn't seem like a terrible candidate for the Dems at the time for that state, but the national environment and the realigning of some of these southern states, that was more than enough for the Republican. What about California? Jerry Brown won his fourth term overall, and he won it by a massive landslide, 20%. He's at 60. So long career for Brown, and this is the cap on it. How about Colorado? This one was exciting. John Hickenlooper, the incumbent Democrat, almost went down to Republican Bob Beaupre. Beaupre first had to get through that primary, and then Hickenlooper was clearly vulnerable here. The state had been getting bluer and bluer, so that was enough for Hickenlooper to hold on here with a plurality. In Connecticut, we've got a nail-biter here. Even though it's also a blue state, incumbent Democrat Dan Malloy, he almost went down here to Tom Foley. Malloy did hit 50% here, but this was actually a rematch, and the second election in a row that was an absolute squeaker. But if you want even more of a squeaker, we've got Florida here. Back then, not as red of a state as it is today. This was kind of the inverse of Colorado and Connecticut. Here you had incumbent Republican Rick Scott. He edged it out the first time, and here he is going for re-election against Charlie Crist, former Republican, former governor. And by about 1%, Scott was able to claim victory. In Georgia, incumbent Republican Nathan Deal won re-election with almost 53% of the vote over Jason Carter, who was the grandson of Jimmy Carter. So big name there, didn't translate into success for the Dems. Then we've got Hawaii. This one absolutely notable because incumbent Democrat Neil Abercrombie, he was actually defeated in the primary by David Ige. Here's the results right here, and it's a blowout. Ige won by 36%. So you don't often see an incumbent go down, especially by that kind of a margin. But in the general election, given how blue the state is, it wasn't really a contest. Duke Ionia was again the nominee for the Republicans. He only got 37%, and Ige won by 12 in a three-way race. In Idaho, not much to see here. We've got Butch Otter. He won another term. He got 53.5%. The more notable event here was in the primary where Otter won by less than 10%. Then we've got Illinois. Here's another notable one. We've got incumbent Democrat Pat Quinn. He was defeated by businessman outsider Bruce Rauner. It was about a 4-point race here for Rauner. He won every county except for Cook County. And Rauner also had a narrow primary win, but in the general, he gets to brag that he took down an incumbent. Let's go on to Iowa. Here it's the legend, Terry Branstad. He's running for his sixth term overall, and he seems unbeatable. He won here by more than 20%. It would be his last term, and he would eventually go on to be the longest serving governor in U.S. history. Then we've got Kansas. Here's another interesting one. Sam Brownback, the incumbent Republican who was unpopular because a lot of his fiscal policy. He still won re-election over a seemingly inoffensive candidate, Paul Davis. Brownback was at a plurality of 49.8%. Davis was at 46.1%. And just like Illinois, this is the last time a Republican actually had success in these states. It's also the same and it's also the same thing in the next state. We've got Maine. Here's Paul LePage, the Republican incumbent. He won a three-way race over Mike Meachow. He's at 48.2, Meachow 43.4. Who knows what would have happened if it was just a head-to-head matchup without the independent. But Republicans with another win here. Then it's Maryland. This one was a notable upset because it's such a blue state, but Republican Larry Hogan was able to defeat Anthony Brown. If you take a look at the polling for this race, it looked like Brown was going to win. The very last poll here at the top did show Hogan with a lead, but he was only at 44%. So this one kind of came out of nowhere. I guess there was a lot of late movement. And this is not a state where Republicans have success, but Hogan would go on to be popular here, governing as a moderate. How about Massachusetts? Kind of a similar story. Republican Charlie Baker defeated Martha Coakley, who already lost to Scott Brown in that Senate race a few years earlier. So she takes another loss to Baker. He's at 48.4, she's at 46.5. It's another blue state, but a moderate or liberal Republican here clearly had success. Baker would also go on to be extremely popular. And then in Michigan, this was close. Incumbent Republican Rick Snyder held on over Mark Schauer. There's about a 4 point margin, also the last time Republicans won in this state. In Minnesota, Mark Dayton, the incumbent Democrat, he defeated Jeff Johnson by 5.5%. So that's a hold there for the Dems. And then in Nebraska, first let's take a look at this primary. Pete Ricketts won it, but his margin was just about 1%. He's only at 26.9. So that's an extreme nail biter. Then in the general election, he coasted by 18% over the Democrat. In Nevada, this was an absolute landslide here for incumbent Republican Brian Sandoval. He was very popular. He easily won every county, including Clark. And if you want to see something really, really notable, take a look at the primary. For the Dems, none of these candidates actually was the winner over the actual Democrat Bob Goodman. That's incredible to see that kind of unpopularity with your nominee. So these numbers show that Goodman wasn't going to stand any kind of a chance in the general, and he didn't. Then in New Hampshire, incumbent Democrat Maggie Hassan won re-election by about 5%. It's the last time the Democrats actually won here. Let's keep going. We've got New Mexico. Here's the last time Republicans won in this state, and it was a comfortable margin, almost 15% for Susana Martinez in her re-election. Then in New York, there's a lot going on here in this box, but in the end, it's anticlimactic. Cuomo won another term. He's at 54.3. That was a 14% margin. Then in Ohio, John Kasich blew out Ed Fitzgerald in a massive landslide. It's over a 30% margin here for Kasich. Then we can move on to Oklahoma. It's a win here for incumbent Republican Mary Fallin. Her margin was almost 15%. Then we've got Oregon. John Kitzhaber, the incumbent Democrat, he won a fourth term overall, but in typical blue state Oregon fashion, it's not a landslide here for the Dems for governor. Kitzhaber just under 50%, close to a 6% margin. He would face a scandal shortly after, and he would go on to resign. Now we've got Pennsylvania. This is the Battle of the Toms. Incumbent Republican Tom Corbett, who was not popular, was defeated by Democrat Tom Wolf. It was almost a 10% margin. That's the last time Republicans won in the state for governor, so Dems have a nice flip there. Then in Rhode Island, here's a three-way race in an open seat. It was fairly close. Gina Raimondo won with over 40% of the vote. Alan Fung was the Republican. He made it close, but he still lost by more than 4. He would go on to lose again 4 years later in a much less favorable environment. In South Carolina, this was a rematch. Nikki Haley won re-election over Vincent Shaheen. She's at about 56%, so she didn't really break much of a sweat. In South Dakota, here's Dennis Daugaard. He won his last term here prior to Kristi Noem, and this is an absolute blowout here. He's over 70%. That's a 45-point margin there for Daugaard. Then let's go on to Tennessee. It's another totally one-sided affair. Republican incumbent Bill Haslam. He won every county in the state. He's over 70%. Also on the ballot here is independent John J. Hooker. He was the nominee for the Dems back in 1970 and 1998. So a bit of a fun fact there. Then we've got Texas. Here's a familiar name. We've got Greg Abbott. He won his first term here by more than 20% over Wendy Davis. She made a big name for herself prior to this election, speaking out against abortion while she was in the legislature. So there was talk that this race could become competitive. In the end, it completely fizzled. Greg Abbott here sails by more than 20. Then we've got Vermont. This is the last election before Phil Scott and the last time Democrats won here, but it was close. Peter Shumlin barely won re-election. He's only at 46.4%. That's just over a 1% margin. Then we've got Wisconsin. In the last win for a Republican, Scott Walker defeated Mary Burke by about 6%. That's his third win in 4 years. After 2010, the recall in 12, and then here in 14. And finally, we've got Wyoming. Nothing exciting here. Matt Mead won his second term. He's at 59.4%. That's more than 30 points, although Mead was unable to win every county. So that's what we've got for 2014. And there's a bunch of flips here. There's Alaska going independent. Dems had a pickup in Pennsylvania, while Republicans had one in Arkansas, Illinois, Maryland, and Massachusetts. A good handful of these were very competitive and under 5% margins. Who knows what would have happened if Rick Scott lost in Florida or John Hickenlooper was defeated in Colorado. The biggest upset on here is probably Larry Hogan in Maryland. But don't forget about incumbent Neil Abercrombie going down to the primary in Hawaii. And Bruce Rauner in Illinois, that's also a notable GOP win. So a red-leaning year certainly gave Republicans more success here. But in a lot of these states, this is the last time Republicans actually won. Eventually that could change, but for now, let me know in the comments. What do you think about these 2014 governor's elections? Which couple of states stand out to you the most? Who do you think were the good or the bad candidates? Let me know any of the races you're taking a look at down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.